The sun, a molten eye bleeding into the horizon, cast long, distorted shadows across the arid expanse of Elias Thorne's neglected homestead. His worn, calloused hands, calloused from years of labor and more than a few unfortunate run-ins with malfunctioning tech, gripped the handle of the heavy-duty plasma shovel, each downward strike echoing with the metallic crunch of parched earth and embedded stone. He couldn't pinpoint the exact catalyst for this self-imposed torture. Perhaps it was a futile attempt to fill the void left by the factory's closure that had also claimed his career as a technician, a job he secretly loved for the complex puzzles it always posed, even if it meant he frequently got shocked by the devices he was attempting to fix. Or maybe it was the gnawing emptiness where his wife, Serafina, should have been, her absence as silent and vast as the desert that surrounded him, making the already desolate landscape feel even more empty. With little else but time and the stubborn refusal to let his land return to the wilderness, he decided to excavate the overgrown back section of the yard. The endeavor felt more like a penance than a project, a way to use the anger and grief he was currently feeling. A deep sigh escaped his lips, the dry air of the late summer afternoon clinging to his face like a shroud, a testament to the heat and the lack of rain. He paused, his muscles screaming for respite, and reached for the battered water canteen nestled amongst the gnarled roots of a fallen ironwood tree. He took a long, deliberate swallow, the tepid liquid offering little relief from the oppressive heat, his mind already thinking of an ice-cold drink. He glanced at his loyal companion, a hulking, cybernetically enhanced wolf named Titan, who lay panting under the shade of a stunted mesquite tree, his electric blue eyes occasionally lifting to check on Elias' progress, as if silently gauging his well-being and judging his choice of outdoor activities. Digging was his only solace, a way to physically exhaust himself and keep the persistent whispers of failure at bay, those insidious reminders of a life unraveled, a career lost, and a love that was no more. The shovel struck something unyielding with a resounding clang, an impact that vibrated through his bones and made him curse under his breath. Not a rock or root. This was different, definitely different, he thought, as he felt the change in the vibration. Elias knelt, his fingers brushing away the loose soil and tracing the edges of a smooth, curved surface that felt oddly warm despite the heat, the touch unexpected and somewhat unsettling. This wasn't some discarded junk. It was deliberate, crafted, as if something from a long-forgotten history was now trying to make itself known. A surge of curiosity, something he hadn't felt in a long time, washed through him, and a small smile returned to his face, something he hadn't seen in ages. He uncovered more of it, revealing a pod sleek and ovoid, its surface a mosaic of shimmering opalescent patterns that seemed to shift and change like an optical illusion, with every angle and every movement. A faint, melodic hum emanated from it, so subtle it was almost imperceptible, yet the vibration sent a strange thrill down his spine, almost like an electric shock. As he brushed away more of the dirt, a hatch became visible, an intricate seam on its surface, as if to say, "Look what lies within if you have the courage." Hesitation gnawed at him. A rational part of him screamed to cover it back up and pretend he had imagined the whole thing. But the curiosity was relentless, as if a part of him was calling out for something, urging him forward and taking over his own thought processes. He finally pressed his palm against the panel, his breath catching in his throat. For a moment nothing, and then the pod shuddered, a wave of energy rippling through the ground, making the hair on his arm stand up on end. The panel illuminated with a complex web of glowing lines that spread across its surface like veins of pure light, a sight that was both wondrous and unsettling. He stumbled backward, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm as the pod hissed, a seam appearing along its side and a hatch slowly slid open, releasing a cloud of luminescent mist that shimmered in the air, and nestled within what looked like a bed of soft, translucent material, was a being that was both familiar and utterly alien, her form almost ethereal in the dimly lit space. She appeared humanoid, yet there was something undeniably otherworldly about her, a sense that she had been crafted in a different dimension and was now here in his backyard, for reasons unknown. Her skin was not just pale, but seemed to radiate an inner light, a constantly shifting kaleidoscope of opalescent colors that rippled beneath her touch, almost as if she were a living, breathing aurora borealis. Her hair, a cascade of silver that seemed almost liquid, floated around her head, defying gravity as though it had a mind of its own, and her eyes, closed for now, were framed by lashes so fine they appeared like spun crystal, each strand a delicate work of art. Elias' breath hitched. She wasn't human, not in any sense of the word, and a mix of awe and apprehension washed over him. "Did I finally lose my mind?" he muttered under his breath. As he watched, her chest rose and fell, the first indication of life, her breathing soft and shallow, a sign that she was alive and not some hallucination. Then her eyelids fluttered open, revealing luminous orbs that resembled liquid starlight, an intense, ethereal gaze that seemed to pierce through him, making him feel as though she was looking right into his soul. She moved slightly, her actions deliberate and languid as if she was adjusting to the very gravity he took for granted, her movements creating a sensual sway, and his own world tilted on its axis as their gazes met, and he felt his breath catch in his chest. Elias took a step back, dropping the shovel with a loud clatter that broke the silence, as the alien turned her head to look at him, her gaze locking onto his with an otherworldly intensity. Her lips moved, forming words in a language that was both melodic and alien, each syllable a complex sequence of notes that echoed in the air, resonating within him as if he understood what she was saying, a strange feeling that he could not explain. He held up his hands instinctively, a gesture of surrender and peace, attempting to communicate that he was no threat, even though he was now unsure of his own safety. "Hey, it's okay," he managed, his voice trembling slightly with a mixture of fear and fascination. "I'm not gonna hurt you or whatever is in there with you. If you've brought friends, please make sure they are friendly." She tilted her head, her gaze studying him with an almost comical intensity, taking in every detail of his face and body as if she could see into the very core of his being and could dissect all of his insecurities. Slowly, she raised a hand, her fingers long and elegant, tipped with what looked like faintly glowing nails, each one like a small piece of art. Elias flinched, unsure of her intentions, but he found that he could not look away, his eyes fixed on her. Then she extended her hand towards him. A wave of soft, radiant energy pulsed from her palm, a force that seemed to make his surroundings blur momentarily, as though he was looking through an old camera with a broken lens. When the light faded, he realized that she wasn't trying to harm him. Instead, she was mirroring his gesture, offering a silent reassurance in return. "Well, that's one way to say you don't mean harm," he muttered to himself. "Right," Elias said, lowering his hands, his heart still racing, but a strange sense of calm began to wash over him. "That was a little theatrical, you know." He suddenly felt the urge to test her, as if making jokes would somehow lessen the alien nature of the scene in front of him. "You don't understand me." "I don't understand you," he continued, still making jokes as he gestured between them, hoping to bridge the gap in some way. "But you're here, and I found you, and well, I guess we'll have to start there, although you did take all of the fun out of digging." He suddenly stopped as the being blinked, her luminous gaze shifting towards the sky as if searching for guidance from some unknown power. "Are you checking for signals up there? Want me to get a satellite dish?" She then looked back at him, her expression softening, the intensity in her gaze now gone, and a strange feeling of familiarity washed over him. He had found her, and she, him, and their lives, as well as his peace, were irrevocably changed. The alien's luminescent gaze lingered on Elias, her eyes like pools of shifting starlight, studying him with an intensity that made his heart pound against his ribs as if he were on an alien operating table. He could feel the heat emanating from her, a subtle warmth that seemed to penetrate his skin, drawing him in like an insect to a moth, as if they were connected by some invisible force. Bolt, ever protective, padded closer, sniffing the air, a low growl rumbling deep within his chest. His enhanced cybernetic eyes narrowed with suspicion, as if he was making sure that this new alien friend of his was not a danger. Elias reached down to pat the wolf's head, his fingers running through his thick fur, murmuring soft reassurances. "It's okay, Bolt, she isn't a threat, I think she likes you. Maybe you two will be buddies." His gaze shifted back to the alien, his words a question to her, but also himself, because even he wasn't sure what she was or what her intention was. She tilted her head at the dog's growl, her opalescent skin shimmering softly as her body seemed to adapt to the cool air, almost as if she was a chameleon, adapting to her new environment. She extended her hand to Bolt, who hesitated before sniffing cautiously, his tail giving a tentative wag in response to her gentleness, as if he had finally found a friend that he could communicate with. Elias let out a shaky breath, marveling at how unthreatened she seemed, as if the unknown was simply another opportunity for discovery. His body felt taut with a mixture of fascination and unease. He couldn't quite shake the tension coiling in his chest. "All right," he muttered, more to himself than to her, his mind racing to make sense of the impossible situation. "Now that we have introduced you to my guard dog, what next?" She shifted slightly, stepping out of the pod with an effortless grace that seemed utterly unnatural, as if she was walking on air, a performance for an audience of one. Her bare feet, delicate and slender, touched the grass, and the ground beneath them seemed to pulse with soft light, a brief shimmer that vanished as quickly as it appeared, as if to say, "You've not seen anything yet." He caught the subtle movement, his heart skipping a beat, his chest tightening with a mix of intrigue and unease. "What are you, a firefly? How do you keep glowing all the time? Is it some kind of internal battery? Maybe you need a recharge. Do aliens have rechargers?" he mumbled under his breath. He gestured towards his weathered homestead, a dilapidated shack that felt even more rustic in comparison to her ethereal presence. Let's get you inside. You probably need, I don't know, something." "Shelter, is that what you guys use?" He gestured towards the door. Her gaze turned towards the sound of his voice, a melodic murmur escaping her lips in response, a subtle hum that vibrated through his body, a soft melody that he couldn't quite place. He stopped mid-step at a complete loss, unsure how to proceed. She clearly didn't understand, yet there was an almost questioning tone to her alien words, as though she was seeking guidance, not just through words, but through the very energy that seemed to radiate from her. He pointed towards his house again, mimicking walking with exaggerated steps, his movements clumsy and uncoordinated in comparison to her smooth movements. "Come on. This way, my abode, my place of solace, my tiny little shack." She blinked, her luminescent eyes seeming to process his gestures and the silly words he had used, before giving a delicate nod, following him without hesitation, her steps as fluid and effortless as a flowing stream, her presence as graceful as a queen entering her palace. He glanced back at her every few steps, his mind still reeling at the impossible reality. She looked as though she belonged in a different dimension, not on the rocky ground of his backyard. His house was a rundown, single-story dwelling, the paint peeling and faded, the floorboards groaning under the weight of time, as if sighing in resignation. He had lived here his entire life, inheriting it after his father's death, a place that was both comforting and full of bad memories. It was comfortable enough, although the silence had grown heavier after Lyra left. Now, he felt an odd sense of embarrassment at its weathered state as he opened the door for his guest, the house's dilapidation a stark contrast to her otherworldly beauty. "I'm sorry about the mess," he said, as if she understood him. "It's nothing special," he said, glancing over his shoulder as he led her into the house. "Not exactly high-tech. I know what the people on your planet might think of us." He stopped himself, realizing the ridiculousness of the statement and knowing that he was starting to sound like a complete idiot. She probably didn't care or even understand. This was something he had to stop doing. Still, she stepped inside without hesitation, her radiant presence seeming to make the small, cramped living room feel even more confined, as if the space itself was trying to get away from her. Titan followed, sniffing at her feet, before settling down on the worn rug with a contented sigh, as if he was starting to accept her. Her gaze swept through the room, her starlight eyes lingering on the cracked and faded leather of the old couch, the cluttered shelves filled with old tech and broken parts, the flickering glow of a bulb he hadn't yet replaced, all of it a reminder of his own lack of domestic skills. She moved towards the window, her hand gently parting the threadbare curtain as she peered out at the twilight, her expression one of quiet curiosity. Elias felt awkward, his hands fidgeting at his sides, unsure of what to do next. "You hungry?" He winced, the question absurd like a greeting made for earthlings. Did beings such as her even eat? Maybe your planet has some kind of energy paste. "I have no idea." He went to the kitchen, pulling out a loaf of stale bread and a jar of nut butter, his actions awkward and clumsy, the meager provisions a stark contrast to her ethereal grace. "I don't have much, but," he said. When he turned back, she was standing in the kitchen doorway, watching him with the same intensity she had in the backyard, her gaze making him feel as if he was on display. He hesitated, then tore a small piece of bread and extended it towards her, his hands almost shaking with a strange mix of nervousness and anticipation. She gazed at it before reaching out, her fingers brushing his as she took the offering and sending a jolt through his entire body. The brief contact sparked a wave of heat through him, a reminder of the sensual nature of their encounter, but he ignored it, focusing instead on her reaction. She sniffed the bread delicately before taking a small bite, her expression neutral. She finished it quickly, nodding once, an almost comical gesture that seemed to convey approval or perhaps just a need to not be rude. "All right," Elias said, relief washing over him, and a small grin appeared on his face. "A start, at least. I guess this is a good sign. Maybe you like human food, or maybe you are just hungry." As the night deepened, a strange sense of companionship began to blossom, or perhaps a very intense crush. He found himself looking at her, wondering what secrets she held and what she might think of him. The soft rhythm of the ceiling fan, a relic of a bygone era that miraculously still functioned, and Bolt's occasional snores were the only sounds that filled the old house. Now, they felt comforting. Elias sat cross-legged on the worn rug, the floorboards creaking under his weight, her silhouette visible opposite him in the dim light of a desk lamp, the light casting a golden glow over her shimmering skin. She held a chipped ceramic mug of water, studying it with an unnerving focus, as if it held the key to the universe. "It's just water, you know. We Earthlings drink it all the time," he muttered under his breath. He leaned back against the coffee table, his hands running through his messy hair, feeling more awkward than he had ever felt before. "So," he said, even though he knew she wouldn't understand, "I guess you didn't plan on ending up in my backyard, huh? Did your GPS malfunction? Maybe you should return it to the shop." He knew he was talking nonsense, but for some reason he couldn't bring himself to stop. She tilted her head, her starlight eyes narrowed slightly as she seemed to attempt deciphering his words. "Did you understand any of that?" "I didn't think so," he muttered. She then mimicked his posture of leaning back, her movements deliberate but smooth, as though she was learning the art of casual relaxation, her alien grace still somehow apparent in the way that she moved. Elias couldn't help but chuckle softly, the absurdity of the situation starting to feel almost normal, a familiar warmth spreading in his chest, and a strange sense of peace began to form in his mind. He gestured towards the pod through the window, the metallic shell still visible through the twilight, a stark reminder of the events of the day. "You came from that, right? Some kind of ship." "Escape vessel." He mimed a dramatic explosion with his hands, adding appropriate sound effects, and then made sure to add a silly pose at the end. "Boom. Crash. You're here now, and I have no idea what to do about it. We are not equipped for guests from other planets. Maybe I should have signed up for intergalactic travel instead of becoming a technician." Her gaze shifted, following his gestures with growing attention, her eyes widening slightly as she seemed to grasp the concept of what he was demonstrating. She nodded, then raised a hand, drawing shapes in the air with her finger, circles and lines that looked like constellations, her movements fluid and almost mesmerizing. Elias watched, captivated as the shapes left faint trails of shimmering light behind them, like a painting in the sky. She pointed at the shapes and then at the sky, her melodic tones, a mixture of grief and explanation drifting through the room, a story told in a language that he could not understand but strangely felt. "You're from up there," Elias said softly, pointing up at the night sky outside, his hand reaching out to touch the ethereal light that danced around her. "Stars. So, what planet do you come from, I wonder? Is it called Planet Bob, or maybe Planet Steve? I like Planet Steve, it has a good ring to it." He mimicked her gesture, drawing a crude constellation in the air with his finger, his mind still reeling, but now his heart was racing, wanting to understand her. Her eyes widened, a flicker of recognition as she nodded emphatically, a soft, almost breathless sound escaping her lips, the closest thing to a laugh he had heard, or a sign that she found his humor amusing. But then her expression darkened, a shadow of pain crossing her features, and a tear, like a single drop of quicksilver, fell from her eye. She drew a jagged shape in the air, followed by what seemed like rippling lines. Her voice grew softer, tinged with sorrow. "Not fun. Did you say your planet is a bit chaotic? I understand that, believe me." Elias didn't need words to understand the message was clear. It wasn't just a crash. It was an escape from a dark and terrible fate. "Someone chased you," he said, his voice low, "or something went wrong." He reached out to touch her hand, an instinct that was beyond his control. She met his gaze, the sorrow in her eyes palpable, and in that moment he felt their souls connect, a bond that transcended language and species. He exhaled, pushing himself to his feet, pacing the room. "Okay," he muttered, thinking out loud, "so you're stuck here. For now, maybe permanently, who knows?" He glanced back at her, then at the pod. "I don't know what's broken, but maybe, just maybe, we can figure it out. Together, after all, what else do we have to do? Watch bad Earth TV? I don't think that will be good for your skin." She tilted her head, watching him with a mixture of curiosity and cautious hope, as if searching for a reason to trust him. She rose, mimicking his posture, and gestured to herself and then him, her expression softening to a hint of gratitude, as though appreciating the humor he was bringing to the situation and his need to help her. "Yeah," Elias said with a small smile, a hopeful glimmer returning to his eyes. "We're a team now, I guess, the most unlikely of teams, but hey, that makes it all the more fun." The soft quiet of the night was suddenly ripped apart by a low, resonant hum, a mechanical thrum that vibrated through the very foundation of the old house and the bones of Elias himself. He froze, his every muscle tensing, his eyes darting towards the window, the sounds a clear warning, as if an alarm bell had just rung inside his head. The sound grew louder, more insistent, unlike any human technology he'd ever heard, a low drone that resonated with an unnatural power. The alien, who had yet to tell him her name, stiffened beside him, her opalescent skin shimmering with a sudden, palpable intensity, as if her entire body was a beacon. Her starlight eyes widened with alarm, a stark contrast to the tranquil nature of the room only moments before. "Oh, this can't be good," he muttered, his mind trying to come up with a plan. Titan, his cybernetically enhanced wolf companion, woke with a sudden start, a low growl rumbling deep within his chest as he leapt from his spot on the couch, his teeth bared in a warning. Elias grabbed the flashlight from the coffee table, its beam cutting through the darkness, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. "What the hell is that?" he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else as he struggled to come up with a strategy. The alien rushed to the window, her movements now quick and purposeful as she peered into the blackness outside, her senses now finely tuned to the danger that was coming. She turned back to Elias, her expression a mix of urgency and fear, her melodic voice rising in pitch and volume as she gestured towards her pod with a sense of desperation that was impossible to ignore, as if she was attempting to tell him something through pure energy and emotions. Elias didn't need to understand her language to grasp the message. Something, or someone, was coming, and they were definitely not here for a friendly visit. "So they are not bringing you cookies," Elias muttered under his breath. The humming grew even louder, the sounds filling the air with a growing sense of menace, accompanied by an eerie, flickering light that danced across the treetops, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to reach into the house, as if the very darkness itself was trying to consume them. Elias's mind raced, frantically trying to come up with a rational explanation, but finding nothing but dread as his imagination filled with images of terrifying alien creatures. He didn't know what kind of trouble she had brought with her, but it was here now, and it wasn't going to wait for an invitation or a formal introduction. He reached out, his hand gently grasping the alien's arm, attempting to guide her away from the window and towards a safer spot. "Okay, we need a plan," he murmured, more to himself than to her, his mind racing, desperately trying to find a way to keep them both safe from whatever was out there. She pulled her arm away, her actions sharp and deliberate, her body moving with a sudden purpose, as if she had been trained for this her whole life, to protect herself and those she cared about. She darted towards the door, her movements were quick and graceful like a dancer, but this was no performance. Elias followed, calling out, "Wait! You can't just..." But she was already outside, her iridescent form glowing faintly under the moonlight as she sprinted towards her pod with an otherworldly speed that made him stumble in surprise. "Seriously," he mumbled. Titan barked loudly, his powerful limbs moving quickly across the room, bounding after her, and Elias let out a groan of exasperation, as he had no intention of being left behind. "Of course," he muttered, grabbing his worn work boots and shoving them on as he raced after them, his mind struggling to keep pace with the escalating events and his own clumsiness. By the time he caught up, she was already at the pod, her hands pressed against its smooth surface, the opalescent patterns glowing brighter than before, a sign of her growing agitation. The glowing lines on the pod's exterior lit up in response to her touch, and Elias watched, both fascinated and anxious, as a panel slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a compartment filled with an assortment of alien tools and devices that pulsed with strange lights, things that were beyond his understanding, but a clear indication that she was ready to fight. She grabbed something that looked like a sleek, metallic tablet, its surface glowing with strange and intricate symbols, and her fingers moved across its surface with a speed and precision that was almost otherworldly, her face a mask of intense concentration, focused on what needed to be done, all traces of her previous softness now gone. The droning noise was now deafening, the sounds filling the air with a growing sense of menace, and Elias could see the source, a craft, black and angular, descending through the trees with unsettling precision. Its underside glowed with a menacing red light, bathing the backyard in an eerie, blood-like hue, as if it had been painted that color in preparation for a fight. Elias felt a sudden twist in his stomach as realization hit him. Whoever was in that craft was not here for a friendly exchange, not at all. "Well, I guess we missed out on the alien cookies," he murmured under his breath. The alien turned towards him, her starlight eyes meeting his, her hand suddenly in front of him, holding out one of the devices she'd retrieved from the pod. It looked like a small, polished disc, its smooth surface faintly pulsing with a soft blue light that danced almost playfully. She pressed it into his hand, her fingers brushing against his palm, sending a shock of energy through his body as she spoke something in her melodic language, her tone urgent and commanding. Elias swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry as he held the device in his hand. What am I supposed to do with this? Do I eat it? Use it to charge my phone? I'm not really sure how to use an alien frisbee." She pointed towards the approaching craft, and then mimed the act of throwing the disc, her actions decisive and her eyes betraying a hint of impatience. Elias stared at it, his mind reeling, desperately trying to make sense of the situation. "You want me to throw this at that thing? Are you kidding me?" he asked, more to himself than to her, a question that was both disbelief and exasperation at the absurdity of what she was asking him to do. But he felt a surge of adrenaline, his body moving from the safety of his shock to the need to protect the being that had crash-landed into his life, and maybe into his heart, without any invitation. The air felt heavy, thick with an electric tension that stretched and vibrated between them. As the alien craft descended further, its angular frame a dark silhouette against the moonlit sky, like a monstrous beast closing in on its helpless prey. Elias tightened his grip on the pulsing disc, feeling the strange alien energy thrumming beneath his fingertips, praying that whatever this thing was supposed to do, it wouldn't just explode in his hand or turn him into an alien smoothie before he even had the chance to use it. Or maybe it's just a really fancy paperweight, he wondered to himself. He noticed how the opalescent patterns on the device seemed to shift and change in the dim light, a mesmerizing display of otherworldly technology, as the low hum intensified with each passing second, and he couldn't help but marvel at its beauty, even though they were moments away from the fight of their lives. She stepped in front of him, her iridescent skin glowing even more intensely now, almost like a shield, the craft's menacing red light bathing her in a harsh, dramatic contrast, making her look almost like an avenging angel. She held a second device in her slender hands, a rod that was sleek and metallic, with intricate patterns that pulsed with a faint blue glow, her fingers gripping it tightly. It looked like an instrument of pure power. She glanced back at Elias, her starlight gaze filled with an unspoken sense of urgency, her body rigid with tension, then immediately turned her attention back to the approaching craft, her body language radiating a mix of determination and fear, her muscles tense, ready for action. Titan growled low beside her, a sound that resonated through the ground, his body tensed with a protective instinct, his enhanced eyes fixed on the descending ship, his presence both a comfort and a stark reminder of the danger that surrounded them. "Don't worry, boy, we are about to send this thing back to where it came from," Elias muttered to his wolf. The craft hovered now, a mere 10 feet above the ground, its underside bristling with a complex array of alien mechanisms, spinning apertures that pulsed with red light, glowing orbs that seemed to radiate a palpable sense of menace, its very presence an omen of destruction. A sudden burst of static, like a screeching tear, pierced the air, followed by a harsh, guttural voice that spoke in the same incomprehensible language as her, as though two alien overlords were trying to challenge each other. Elias couldn't tell if it was a warning or a threat, but the ominous tone was clear enough, the sound sending a shiver of dread down his spine, making him fully aware of the terrifying danger that they faced. They didn't exactly come here for a chat, did they? Elias muttered under his breath, his jaw tightening as he tried to maintain a sense of calm and keep his focus on the task at hand, knowing that if he gave in to fear, then they were certainly doomed. He glanced at the alien, but her focus was unwavering, her attention completely fixated on the craft, her posture as rigid as metal, her muscles coiled and ready to spring. Whatever this confrontation was, it was deeply personal to her, a battle that she had been preparing for her entire life. With a sharp hum, the craft emitted a beam of intense red light that swept across the clearing, zeroing in on her, and then locking onto him as well, as if it was making a deliberate point that they were both targets of the beam. Elias's breath hitched, his body tensing as he felt the heat from the beam, palpable even at this distance, washing over him, a chilling reminder of the impending danger. It felt like a physical touch, and it made his heart quicken even faster, like his body was attempting to escape the clutches of death itself. "Okay, that's new," he said, his voice tinged with a mixture of nervous energy and growing alarm. "I'm not sure if I enjoy that feeling. Is it a threat or just a power move? What now?" She didn't respond with words, never one to state the obvious, but instead she raised the rod-like device in her hand, activating it with a sharp flick of her wrist, her movements fluid and precise as if this was all practiced, as though she was conducting an orchestra with her alien instrument. A shimmering barrier of light suddenly sprang up around them, a dome that was almost invisible but had a strange protective power, encasing Elias, the alien, and Titan in its faintly glowing aura. The red beam from the craft struck the barrier and scattered harmlessly, sending out a wave of energy that rippled across its surface like a shimmering mirage, a temporary reprieve against the impending attack, a short delay that gave him time to breathe. Elias's jaw dropped, his eyes widening with a mixture of awe and disbelief as he marveled at the alien's power. "All right, that's incredible. I'm starting to think that I am the underqualified one in this team." His sense of wonder was cut short, though, as the craft began to circle them, its menacing hum growing louder, more intense, as if to remind them of the true nature of its intentions. Clearly, the barrier wasn't going to hold forever. They were in a precarious situation, and Elias felt the sudden need to act, to stop admiring the magic and instead take part. She turned to him, her starlight eyes a complex mix of determination and fear, her face set, her jaw tight, as if she had finally reached the decision to fight back. She pointed at the disc in his hand, then towards the craft, her actions urgent, and her melodic voice rose in pitch and volume as she repeated the motion, communicating with her alien tones that he could not understand, that this was their only option and time was running out. Elias felt his stomach tighten with apprehension and a strange sense of exhilaration. It was time to do what was right, even if he was terrified of what was to come. "You're serious? You really want me to throw this at them? Maybe I should just offer them some coffee and we talk this through?" he asked, his voice reflecting the sheer absurdity of the situation, hoping against hope that there was another option. She nodded emphatically, her luminescent gaze unwavering, her face betraying no hesitation, conveying that this was their only course of action and time was quickly running out. "You want me to throw this? Okay, I can throw things. I guess, let's do it." Elias let out a shaky breath, adrenaline coursing through his veins as he steeled his resolve. "All right," he said, his voice trembling slightly as he stepped forward, outside of the protective glow of the barrier, the pulsing disc feeling suddenly heavier in his hand now, as if it was starting to realize the gravity of the task it was about to undertake. He took a deep breath, his body and mind focusing on his actions. The craft immediately adjusted its position, the menacing red beam shifting to lock onto him now, a clear indicator of their intentions, making him the target. "Well, that's not ominous at all," he muttered under his breath, squaring his shoulders and raising his chin. "I wonder what the intergalactic travel guide says about this." She called out to him, her voice sharp and urgent, a sound that resonated with a sense of frantic desperation, as if reminding him that there was no time for hesitation or jokes. It was time to get to work. Elias drew his arm back, took a deep breath, and with a yell of determination hurled the disc with all his might, the force of the throw taking him by surprise. The disc sailed through the air in a smooth arc, a blue streak in the darkness, its energy building as it hurtled towards the craft, a beacon of hope in the tense atmosphere. "Please don't fail me now," he whispered under his breath. For a moment nothing happened, and Elias's heart sank with a wave of dread, his face paling as the possibility of failure consumed him. Had he missed his mark? Was the device defective? Was this their last stand and he had just messed it all up? A sense of despair began to creep in, making his shoulders slump as the silence grew around him. But then, with a metallic clink that reverberated through his very bones, the disc latched onto the underside of the craft, its surface gripping the smooth metal with an almost organic certainty, a promise of change in the oppressive atmosphere. A high-pitched whine immediately pierced the air, a sound that was both terrifying and strangely beautiful, followed by a ripple of energy that pulsed across the ship's surface, the blue light of the disc intensifying as it began to work its magic. The red lights on the craft flickered erratically, and its menacing hum was suddenly replaced by a series of jarring, mechanical screeches, as if the disc was tearing it apart from the inside, and the alien ship was fighting for its life. The craft wobbled in the air, its stability compromised, and it began to shake violently as its internal systems malfunctioned and fought against the blue energy. Elias took a step back, his body recoiling from the sudden chaos, shielding his eyes with his arm as the ship emitted a final, deafening roar before crashing into the ground with a thunderous impact that shook the entire clearing, sending a shockwave that resonated through his bones, and making even the air itself tremble with the force of it. Dirt and debris erupted into the air, a cloud of dust and smoke that blotted out the moonlight, and for a brief moment the entire clearing was shrouded in a deafening silence that was both ominous and strangely beautiful. "Well, that was dramatic," Elias mumbled under his breath, hoping that it was over, but suspecting that this was only the beginning. Elias slowly lowered his arm, his ears ringing with the echoes of the crash, his body still trembling from the adrenaline that was coursing through his veins, his heart still beating rapidly in his chest, his eyes fixed on the wreckage that now lay smoking and burning in his yard. Did that just work?" he asked, his voice hoarse and strained, barely able to believe what he had just witnessed, his mind still struggling to comprehend the sheer absurdity of the situation and what it all meant for the future. She immediately stepped out of the protective barrier, her glowing skin dimming slightly as the rod in her hand deactivated, the light fading from its previous intensity, and walked toward Elias, her movements fluid and purposeful as always, as if she had complete confidence in their course of action, even though the situation was completely out of the ordinary. She placed a delicate hand on his arm, her touch surprisingly warm and steady despite the chaos that had just unfolded, a brief but meaningful connection that seemed to bring him back to Earth, and yet also draw him further into her world. "Elias," she said, her voice softer now, almost reverent, a hint of a smile playing on her lips the way she spoke his name, a new sound in his ears, sent a shiver of warmth through his body and made his heart pound a little faster than it had after the fight. He turned to her, his heart still racing in his chest, his eyes meeting hers, searching for some kind of reassurance and answer, a way to know if they had survived their first big encounter. "Yeah, I'm here, still alive and as clumsy as ever," he said, his voice shaky but laced with a touch of humor. "Are we safe? Did you guys have something called a victory dance? I think we deserve one." But before she could respond, a sense of unease began to creep into his mind, a warning that was hard to ignore. The wreckage of the craft suddenly began to stir, a section of the ship's hull sliding open with a metallic hiss, a sound that echoed through the clearing and sent a fresh wave of dread washing over his body, confirming his fears that this fight was not yet over. From within, a figure emerged, tall, angular, and covered in dark, chitinous armor that seemed to shimmer with an unnatural sheen, its form as ominous as it was terrifying. Its glowing red eyes locked onto them immediately, and it let out a guttural growl that sent chills down Elias's spine, a sound that was both threatening and filled with a deep sense of malevolence, telling him that they had merely won one battle and the war had only just begun. "Oh, come on, can't anyone just stay down? I'm getting tired of fighting," he said under his breath. "Oh, come on," he muttered, backing away instinctively as his body attempted to escape the danger, even though his mind knew that there was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. "Wasn't blowing up your ship enough? I mean, it seemed like a pretty good effort for me. I am starting to think I should be in charge of the throwing devices from now on." His mind was reeling from the sudden turn of events, and his sense of humor was all he had to help him cope with the sheer terror that was consuming him, as his gaze was fixed on the creature that now stood before them. She stepped in front of him, her body language radiating a fierce protectiveness, her shoulders squared and her hands gripping her rod tightly, as if she were ready to take on the entire alien army single-handedly. She raised the rod again, its light flaring back to life, and began speaking in her melodic language, her tones now sharper and more commanding than before, each syllable a complex message of warning and defiance. The armored figure responded with a guttural series of snarls and growls, their language grating and discordant, as if two opposing forces were now ready to clash once more. The tension between them was almost tangible, creating an intense, palpable bubble of energy that filled the clearing, a battle between the known and the unknown, a battle between species and ideologies. Elias realized with a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach that this wasn't over, that the war had only just begun. Whatever had chased her here wasn't going to simply give up, not by a long shot, and now, it was standing right in his backyard, ready to engage once again, and their fight for survival was about to continue. The armored figure stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate, as though it were methodically sizing them up, calculating their strengths and weaknesses, a hunter stalking its prey before the final blow. The air around it seemed to ripple with an unnatural heat, its red eyes boring into him with a predatory intensity, and the faint red glow intensifying, making him feel as though it could see into the very core of his soul and know all of his hidden fears. Elias could feel his pulse hammering in his ears, the adrenaline still coursing through his body, but a strange sense of defiance had begun to grow in him, the need to protect the alien, whose name he didn't know, rising above his fear and pushing him forward, even though his body screamed at him to run. Whatever this thing was, it radiated an aura of cold, calculated menace, a creature whose sole purpose was destruction. "Well, this is no good," he muttered under his breath, trying to find his footing. Her stance was unwavering, her back straight and proud, her rod raised in a defensive position, her body language radiating a fierce protection, as if she had been trained her entire life for this very moment, and was prepared to die trying to keep them both safe. Her melodic voice, now sharp and commanding, filled the air as she began to speak, her words clearly directed at the creature, a clear warning, a challenge, and a threat all at once. Elias didn't understand the alien language, but he understood her tone. Her body language was clear enough to communicate her message to both him and her enemy: back off, or face the consequences. The air felt thick, heavy, as though even nature itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what actions would follow. The creature responded with a guttural snarl, a sound that seemed to reverberate through Elias's chest, a primal noise that vibrated through his bones and made his skin prickle with fear. It raised one of its clawed hands, revealing a weapon embedded within its forearm, a sleek, metallic contraption that began to hum ominously, its energy resonating with an unnatural intensity that could only mean harm, as if death itself was ready to embrace them both. "Great, I've always wanted to be a martyr," Elias muttered sarcastically. "Sora, I really hope you have a plan," Elias muttered under his breath, his hands clenching into fists as he instinctively stepped closer to her side, a gesture of solidarity, showing her that he was not going to abandon her in this fight, that he was ready to stand beside her no matter what came next. He felt an intense urge to protect her, a sense of connection that transcended species, and pushed him forward. The creature lunged forward without warning, closing the distance between them in a blur of motion, its claws tearing through the air as it attempted to seize them. Sora reacted instantly, her movements a symphony of precision and grace, activating her rod and slamming it into the ground with a resounding impact, her actions flowing as if she was an extension of the weapon itself. A shockwave of blue light erupted from the point of contact, forcing the creature to stagger back with a distorted screech, a testament to her power, the force of the attack sending tremors through the ground, creating a momentary reprieve. But they both knew that it wouldn't last long. The creature was merely stunned, not defeated. "I must admit, those are some fancy moves," he muttered, trying to keep the mood light while also acknowledging her skill. "Okay, that's one hell of a plan," Elias said, his voice tinged with a strange mixture of awe and disbelief, marveling at her sheer power and control, his heart both racing with fear and a sudden surge of exhilaration. His body was moving now, no longer paralyzed by fear but instead by the overwhelming need to act, to play a part in the fight, and he was more than ready to see what she would do next. But the reprieve was brief. The creature recovered quickly, its red eyes narrowing in anger as it circled them like a predatory animal, its movements fluid and controlled, as if it was taking measure of its prey. It moved with a hunter's innate grace, its armored frame gleaming menacingly in the faint moonlight, creating an intimidating presence that was hard to look away from. Sora shifted her position, her movements as fluid as water, her body tense, anticipating its next move with an almost supernatural sense of awareness. She was no longer simply a victim, but a warrior. Elias, on the other hand, felt completely out of his depth, a mere mortal facing a force that was beyond anything he had ever experienced or could have even imagined. "I'm starting to think I should have just stayed home and made myself a sandwich," he muttered under his breath, trying to add some levity to the situation, his mind racing, desperately searching for anything he could do to help, but his body was moving into a zone of adrenaline, not logic. He scanned the surroundings, his eyes darting to the wreckage of the alien craft, the metallic hull still smoldering and partially buried in the earth, his mind grasping at the idea that if Sora's pod had contained tools and weapons, maybe their ship did too. "I'll be right back," he said, his voice filled with a hint of urgency, taking a step towards the downed craft, his desire to be useful now overwhelming his fear and his body propelling him forward. Sora turned to him sharply, her opalescent features a mix of alarm and protest, her hand reaching out as if to stop him, but the creature chose that precise moment to strike again, forcing her attention back to the fight, as if to make sure that Elias would make his choice. He had to act. He could no longer stay on the sidelines. Just hold it off. Elias called out as he began sprinting towards the wreckage, his feet kicking up loose dirt as he ran, ignoring all of the dangers that lay in front of him. Titan barked loudly, his growl a challenge to the creature, and he raced to keep up with his master, his claws tearing at the ground, his own instincts to protect his friend taking control of his actions. They were two unlikely heroes running towards the danger. The heat radiating from the wreckage of the alien craft was intense, the metallic hull still glowing with an unnatural heat that made the air shimmer around it. But Elias didn't let it deter him, his mind now solely focused on his objective, on how he could help his alien companion, and perhaps even save them both. He clambered over a jagged piece of debris, his movements awkward and clumsy in comparison to Sora's grace, his eyes scanning the interior, searching desperately for anything useful, anything that could turn the tide of battle in their favor. Most of the ship's interior was a mess of twisted metal and sparking wires, a chaotic scene that showed the sheer power of the crash, but a faint glow emanating from within caught his attention, a small spark of hope in an ocean of despair, a promise of something he could use. Maybe I will find a ray gun, or better yet, a teleportation device. Anything would be good at this point, he muttered. There, partially embedded in the ship's wall, was a cylindrical device with a smooth, glass-like surface that was strangely cool to the touch, its presence incongruous amidst the chaos, like an ancient artifact left behind by a forgotten civilization. It pulsed faintly with a soft white light that seemed to call to him, a beacon of hope in the darkness, a pull that was hard to ignore, and despite his fears he felt drawn to it, as if it held the key to their survival, a purpose that was bigger than him. Elias didn't have any idea what it was, but it had a powerful look, and it was obviously operational, and he desperately hoped that it would help them now. "All right, mystery alien tech, don't blow up on me, or you will be responsible for my demise," he muttered, yanking it free, his hands gripping the device with a sense of urgency, his mind racing through the possibilities and wondering what the consequences of his actions could be. Behind him, the sounds of the fight intensified, the crash of energy blasts and the guttural snarls of the creature, creating an almost cacophonous backdrop, a symphony of chaos that made his heart beat faster in his chest. He glanced back quickly to see Sora holding her own against the armored beast, her movements a blend of agility and precision, her rod sending out bursts of blue energy that kept the creature at bay. But she was clearly on the defensive, fighting with an urgency that told him she was running out of options, and he had to be quick to help her. His heart beat faster with the thought of his alien ally. Elias turned his attention back to the device, his hands trembling, fumbling with it as he tried to figure out how it worked. There were no obvious buttons or switches, just a series of glowing symbols etched into its smooth surface, patterns that shifted and pulsed as if it was alive and breathing, but he had to find a way to activate it. He tapped one of the symbols experimentally, his movements clumsy, and the device emitted a low hum, a vibration that resonated within his palm, a promise of potential power. "Okay, I guess that's a start," he said, wondering if this was just wishful thinking. The hum grew louder, a more intense vibration that resonated within his bones, and the device began to emit a faint projection into the air above it, a cluster of symbols and diagrams that meant absolutely nothing to him. "Oh, so it's another manual. Great, I'm sure that it will be a bestseller." It was like an alien instruction manual, an impossible guide that was completely indecipherable. So, it's just like Earth technology, complicated and without an easy solution. He muttered under his breath, feeling a sense of dread wash over him. Titan barked sharply, a clear warning that snapped Elias out of his concentration, pulling him back into the reality of his situation. He quickly looked up and saw that the creature had suddenly turned its focus towards him, as if sensing that he had something that it needed. Its red eyes locked onto the device in his hands, its gaze burning with a possessive desire that promised death. "Well, I guess that means I did something right. Oh, you want this, don't you?" Elias said, his voice shaky and slightly trembling as he felt the fear creep up his throat and into his chest. But he still held his head high as he raised the device like a shield, his mind racing through the possibilities, the fear giving way to his need to protect his alien ally. If it was so important to the creature, perhaps he could use it against the very being that wanted it, and it was a gamble that he was now willing to take, a chance that might save them both. The creature snarled, its claws tearing at the earth as it charged. The creature snarled, its claws tearing at the earth as it charged forward, its red eyes fixated on Elias, the device suddenly feeling like a burden rather than a weapon, and suddenly he felt more exposed than before. His heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he backed away, the strange alien energy of the device vibrating more intensely in his hands, as if it were sensing the impending danger, and knew that the battle was about to resume. He tried to remember Sora's movements, trying to mimic them with his clumsy human hands as he sought to activate the device once again, feeling a sense of desperation now that they were so close to the end. Just as the creature was about to reach him, its massive claws reaching out to tear him apart like a wild beast, Sora suddenly appeared, moving with an almost supernatural speed, leaping into its path with a fluid grace that took Elias's breath away and made his heart skip a beat as he witnessed her bravery. She slammed her rod into the creature's chest, the resulting shockwave sending it sprawling backward, its armor cracking under the force of the impact. But the attack was a diversion, meant to buy Elias time, a strategic move that she had anticipated, and she clearly knew it. She was always thinking one step ahead. Sora turned to Elias, her face a mask of fierce urgency, her silver eyes locking onto his, communicating with the intensity of her gaze, her body language radiating a powerful energy as she showed him that she was ready to fight. She pointed at the device in his hand, then at the creature, her melodic voice rising sharply as she shouted something in her alien tongue, her words carrying both command and urgency, a desperate plea to make the impossible possible, to save them all. Elias felt his stomach tighten with anxiety and a strange sense of duty as he tried to interpret her plea, as if it was a language of her soul and not her voice. "Just tell me how. I'm not sure that I can guess what you're thinking. You want me to use this?" Elias asked, his voice cracking under the pressure, his hands shaking, but his mind now focusing on the task at hand, attempting to rise to the challenge and save them both. "How? I don't know how, just tell me." He was at a loss, desperate to help, but desperately needing guidance, his mind racing through all of the options that could save them now. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment and focused on the task at hand, and attempted to activate the device. Sora didn't answer with words. She never used words when action was required, but instead she reached out, her fingers brushing against his as she pressed her hand against the device, her fingers moving quickly and precisely over the glowing symbols on its surface, her touch sending a jolt of energy throughout his body. The projection shifted, the patterns becoming even more complex and intricate, and the device suddenly emitted a sharp, piercing tone that made Elias wince, the high-pitched sound vibrating through his entire body, as if he was becoming one with the alien device, a strange melding of two realities. The creature roared in pain, its movements becoming erratic and clumsy as it clawed at its own head, as if desperately trying to shut out the sound that was causing it so much distress. its armor now starting to buckle. Sora adjusted something else on the device, her face focused and determined, her body radiating confidence, and the tone grew louder and more focused, as if she was honing in on a specific frequency, targeting the creature with an energy that was beyond his understanding. But he knew it was powerful. The creature staggered, its armor cracking and breaking under the strain. The very core of its being seemed to be breaking down under the pressure, as it let out a final, guttural cry that tore through the clearing, a sound that carried with it a mix of pain and anguish, and made his heart clench with a strange compassion, despite the fact that this was his enemy, and it had done nothing to deserve it. With a blinding flash of light that seemed to momentarily sear his vision, the creature suddenly collapsed to the ground, its movement ceasing abruptly, falling motionless, its body still and unmoving, leaving the clearing strangely quiet, the absence of sound more terrifying than the fight itself. For a moment, there was an echo of silence, a space in between the chaos, where it felt like the entire world was holding its breath, as if even nature was stunned by the sudden conclusion. Elias stood frozen, the device still humming faintly in his hands, its strange energy resonating within him, his limbs trembling, his face pale, as if he had expended the last of his strength. He stared at the creature on the ground, his mind racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Did we just win again? I'm not sure how many times I can do that before my heart explodes, he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as he still struggled to come to terms with the fact that he was still standing and the creature was not. Sora turned to him, her expression softening, her silver eyes filled with a mix of relief and gratitude as she nodded in response, her movements as fluid as always despite the intensity of the battle they had just endured. She was always graceful even in the face of danger, as if she had been created to fight. She reached out, taking the device from his hands with a gentle touch, and deactivated it with a single swipe of her finger across the glass-like surface. For a moment they just stood there, her hand lingering on his, the quiet of the night suddenly settling back around them. The fight was over, and yet it felt like everything had just begun. Bolt trotted over, wagging his tail enthusiastically, his nose nudging against their hands as if to say, "Good job, team, are we going to play now?" His tail swishing from side to side in happy glee. Elias let out a shaky laugh, the sound carrying a mixture of relief and exhilaration as he ran a hand through his messy hair. "That was insane," he managed, his voice still trembling slightly from the intensity of the battle and the fact that he had survived again. "Seriously, can we maybe take a few days off to unwind?" Sora smiled, her lips curving into the softest hint of a smile, a gesture that reached her eyes, a genuine expression of warmth and understanding that made Elias's heart skip a beat, as if she could read all of his fears and reassure him at the same time. Her face had turned from the fierceness of the battle to a softness that reminded him of the alien that had crash-landed into his backyard only hours before, and the thought made his heart beat a little faster. "Yeah," he said softly, meeting her gaze, his body moving with its own desire, his hand reaching out to match hers, the touch sending an electric jolt throughout his body that caused him to catch his breath. "We make a pretty good team, don't you think?" He felt a surge of adrenaline running through him, the bond they had created in such a short amount of time resonating in the air. The clearing felt impossibly still now, the wreckage of the alien craft casting long, distorted shadows under the pale moonlight that illuminated the scene. Elias leaned against a nearby tree, his chest rising and falling as he struggled to catch his breath, his entire body still buzzing with adrenaline, as if he had just run a marathon, and had just been thrown into a new world, a world with intergalactic hunters and a beautiful alien that had fallen into his backyard. His hands still trembled from the intense fight he had just endured, but a strange sense of calm was starting to settle in the aftermath of the chaos, the feeling of peace slowly returning to the space they had created. Even if that peace was still tinged with unease, he knew that he would never be the same. Sora stood a few feet away, her iridescent skin dimming back to its soft, muted glow, her posture more relaxed as she observed her surroundings, her movements slow and deliberate as if she was taking stock of all that had transpired and all that had been lost. She crouched down near the remains of the armored creature, her fingers delicately tracing the cracked surface of its chest plate, as if reading a map of the battle that had just taken place, or a message from a long-lost world that only she could understand. Whatever she was looking for, Elias could clearly see the weight of it in her expression, a sense of deep sorrow and longing that radiated off of her like a tangible force, as if she was mourning a fallen comrade, or her previous life that had now been lost forever. He hesitated for a moment before stepping closer, his movements deliberate and slow, attempting to not intrude on her thoughts, yet his desire to be near her pulled him forward like an invisible force. "You all right?" he asked softly, his voice barely above a whisper, afraid to break the fragile silence that now surrounded them, not knowing what words could possibly comfort her. She glanced up, her silver eyes meeting his, the light of the moon casting a halo around her face, accentuating her features, and adding an ethereal quality to her already otherworldly beauty. There was a flicker of vulnerability in her gaze, revealing a depth of emotion that went beyond her alien nature. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod in acknowledgement. "I'm all right," she said, her voice halting, her words clear but almost too soft to hear, as if she was speaking to herself and trying to find comfort in the words. The sound of her speaking his language again caught Elias off guard, taking him by surprise. It was like discovering a hidden treasure in an old chest, a secret that only she could share with him, and his heart swelled with pride that he was the one who got to hear it. He blinked, momentarily stunned, a smile spreading across his lips. "Wait, you can learn," she interrupted, her voice deliberate yet musical. "Your words, enough." There was something almost sensual in the way that she spoke, as if she was learning to communicate through the very way she moved her mouth, almost mirroring his own actions. Elias felt a grin tug at the corners of his mouth, a sense of playfulness returning to his face despite the serious situation. "You've been holding out on me, haven't you? I was starting to think that my hand gestures were too complicated for you." His words almost seemed to be a tease, a way of breaking the tension that still hung in the air between them, a shared joke that only they could understand, a bond that was growing with every passing moment. Sora tilted her head, her lips curving into the faintest hint of a smile, the softest expression of amusement. "Had to listen." "Observe." Her gaze shifted to the pod, and then back to him, as if to say that she had to learn his actions so that she could replicate them with the use of the alien tech, and then she had to learn how to speak through observation. "You talk a lot. I wonder if you are always like this," she added with a teasing smile, her eyes locking onto his, a playful banter that hid a deeper meaning. "That's fair," Elias said, rubbing the back of his neck, a nervous energy still tingling through his body as he tried to calm his heart and his mind. He gestured towards the fallen creature, his brow furrowed in concentration as he tried to make sense of everything that had just occurred, the chaos and mayhem that had transformed his yard into a battlefield. "Any idea who or what that was?" "I mean, they didn't seem like your regular old garden variety alien," he muttered, trying to lighten the mood. Sora's smile faded, replaced by a look of deep sorrow, almost like the loss of a loved one. She looked back at the fallen body, her expression hardening with resolve. "Hunters," she said, her voice quiet, but her words laced with a heavy and ominous meaning as if she was uttering a warning to him and the world. "They follow destroy. Her face clouded over with grief and her jaw tightened, a sign of her need for revenge and her absolute determination to not let this happen again, her need to protect herself and now also Elias. Elias frowned, the weight of her words sinking in as he attempted to connect the dots, to understand all that she had lost and was still trying to fight for. They've been chasing you. This has been going on for a while then, maybe I should take you to my therapist. He has a lot of crazy stories to listen to, he joked. He had a sudden urge to protect her and keep her from suffering any more than she already had, and his heart ached for all that she had lost. She nodded, her actions slow and deliberate, a sign of the exhaustion that was starting to take over her body and the weight of her grief. Long time. My people. Scattered, her gaze softened as if she was remembering them, seeing their faces, hearing their voices, a distant memory that pained her to remember. She gestured towards the wreckage of her own pod, the ship she had used to escape her pursuers, the ship that was now beyond repair, and no longer provided her with a sense of hope. Escape. Hide, she added. Her voice cracked with emotion as she spoke of her people, and the terrible events that had befallen them, her voice becoming quieter with each word as if all of her energy was now leaving her. His chest tightened at the thought of her being hunted, constantly on the run, the need to protect her surging through him like a primal instinct that he could no longer ignore, his life now tied to hers in a way that was beyond his understanding. And now, they've followed you here, all the way to my backyard. You know, I should start charging rent to these intergalactic travelers, he said, trying to maintain a sense of humor. His voice was filled with a mix of disbelief and a touch of worry. He couldn't escape the feeling that they would be back, and his peace had been lost forever, and it was all his fault. Sora stood slowly, her movements graceful despite the exhaustion that was etched into her face, her posture now proud and strong. Despite her inner pain, she was no longer just a victim, but a warrior. Safe, for now, she said, but the words lacked conviction, her eyes telling a different story, her tone reflecting a deep knowing that this was a temporary reprieve, that their story was far from over. Elias crossed his arms, his mind racing, trying to formulate a new plan, knowing that they couldn't rest on their laurels. They needed a way to protect themselves and the world around them. We need a plan, he said firmly, his tone now carrying a sense of purpose, his mind beginning to work overtime. If more of them are coming, we can't just sit here waiting for them to show up, you know. Maybe we should put up more security. How about we get a really big moat? He shook his head, knowing that was impossible, and tried to think more strategically. But the idea of a moat did bring a smile to his face for a moment. Sora tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that made his pulse quicken, as if she was assessing the true nature of his being, searching for the spark of strength that was now shining brightly in his eyes, a spark that had ignited the moment that she entered his life. You think fast, she said, a clear note of admiration in her voice as if to say she was impressed by his abilities to plan, to make decisions when others would freeze, that he had the mind of a warrior and the soul of a protector. Are you always this resourceful? It's both impressive and, frankly, a bit irritating, she added with a teasing smile, her gaze locking onto his, a playful banter that hid a deeper meaning and a respect that was hard to ignore. Comes with the territory, he said, shrugging slightly, a hint of a grin returning to his face despite the circumstances, the humor a shield against the fear he felt, a way to cope with the impending challenges. Humans tend to improvise when things go sideways. We don't exactly have manuals for intergalactic travelers. Do you think someone will write one after this? His words now had a sense of conviction, and he meant what he said. They were going to make it through this together, somehow, someway, even if it was the last thing he ever did. Her gaze softened and she took a step closer, the space between them closing, their bodies almost touching, the shared experience forging a connection that transcended their differences, as they had become bound through action and experience, a shared sense of purpose that was now stronger than before. "Elias," she said, her voice carrying an unfamiliar warmth that sent shivers down his spine, her eyes searching his, her hand now resting on his arm. "You help. Risk for me." Her words were almost a plea, a revealing of her vulnerability, and Elias understood she was not simply a warrior, she was a person, and she needed him now. He felt his cheeks flush, a warmth that had nothing to do with the heat of the summer sun, but something far more profound, as if they were now connected in a way that was impossible to explain, their souls intertwined in a way that was beyond his understanding. "Well, yeah. I couldn't just leave you to face all of this alone," he said, his eyes meeting hers, his voice a low rumble, and her gaze almost made him melt into the grass as he felt his heart beat harder in his chest. "Besides, who else is going to make the bad jokes around here?" he added with a small smile. Sora reached out, her fingers brushing against his hand. The touch was light, almost hesitant, but it sent an electric jolt through his body, a sense of shared connection that transcended species and a promise of something more, a physical connection that was just as powerful as their emotional bond. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling slightly, the sincerity in her tone making his chest tighten with a myriad of emotions, a feeling that was both comforting and yet left him wanting more, a sign of their growing intimacy. "And I promise I won't forget this," she added, her eyes locking onto his, her words carrying a weight that was impossible to ignore, a commitment to the future. Elias cleared his throat, trying to steady himself, knowing that their journey was far from over, and she was far more important to him now than a stranger or even a friend. But he couldn't quite figure out what to call what they were. Not yet. "It's not over yet," he said, his voice a little gruff as he attempted to regain his composure and suppress the intense feeling of protectiveness that he felt whenever she was near him, and the pull that he felt whenever their skin made contact. "We've got to figure out what we're up against and how to stop it. We can't just sit here hoping we don't have another attack." He looked into her eyes and saw the strength that lay underneath the softness, the determination that drove her, and he knew that no matter what came next, he would be right there beside her, fighting with her for her, no matter what it cost him. "And I guess I should probably call you something. I can't keep calling you you or hey you. What name do you have?" He added with a small smile, hoping that this would somehow change the mood. She smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes, her hand still resting lightly in his, her fingers moving as if seeking a stronger connection with him. "Lyra," she said, and his heart suddenly skipped a beat. "My name is Lyra." He met her gaze, his heart now full. It had been so long since he had found a connection like this, and it was hard to not be caught up in the moment. "Lyra, that's beautiful," he murmured as his eyes roamed her face, memorizing every detail, every line and every curve, not wanting to forget what she looked like. A low hum filled the clearing, growing louder as the air shimmered with an iridescent glow, the sounds and lights a clear sign that their time was over. Elias, still leaning heavily on Lyra for support, looked towards the sky, his face a mixture of apprehension and sadness, the knowing that she would soon be leaving him hitting him like a punch to the gut. Above the treetops, a sleek, silver craft descended, its surface rippling like liquid metal as it reflected the golden light of the sunrise, and he could no longer deny what was about to happen. This was the end of their shared story, or at least, a chapter of it. "That's your ride, I'm guessing," Elias said, his voice hoarse but laced with a hint of dry humor as if to shield the real emotion he was feeling, a mix of despair and hope but mostly an unbearable sadness. Lyra nodded, her expression soft but tinged with sadness, her eyes reflecting his own pain. "Yes." "My home," she said, her voice so low that he almost couldn't hear it. It was a confession, not a boast. He knew then that this was the end, and he fought hard not to show it, not wanting to give her the satisfaction of seeing him break. Eliana stepped forward, raising a hand towards the ship. A beam of light shot down, enveloping her in a radiant column that made her seem almost ethereal, as though she was being transported to another dimension. In a flash, she disappeared, transported aboard, her duty now calling her, as her time had come to an end. Lyra turned to Elias, her silver eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made his breath catch in his throat. Their souls connected for eternity, as they would never forget each other, their connection beyond space, time, and species. "You saved me," she said, her voice quiet but steady, her eyes sparkling as she spoke, a testament to her inner strength. More than once. He managed a small smile, ignoring the ache in his side and the gaping wound that was opening up in his heart, his mind still unable to comprehend what was happening or what was to come. "Couldn't just leave you out here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Besides, I think you saved me a few times too. Let's call it even." He looked into her eyes and saw his own reflection staring back at him, their connection now sealed with a promise to never forget. She shook her head, stepping closer, her body almost touching his, the space between them now almost too small to be considered anything but a single beat of their combined hearts. "Not even," she said, her voice as soft as a whisper. "You different, kind, brave," the words a testament to his character, his strength, and the man he had become by helping her. Elias's heart thudded in his chest as she reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against his cheek, a sensual touch that sent waves of pleasure throughout his entire body. Their connection had reached a physical peak. The touch was soft, almost hesitant, but it carried a depth of emotion that words couldn't possibly convey, a promise of a future that could have been, as well as a sign of their deep and meaningful connection. It was a spark that promised an inferno. "I won't forget," she said, her voice trembling slightly, as the emotion of her words filled the space between them, promising him a future, even if that future was uncertain. "I promise, this isn't goodbye." "Neither will I," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper, the sound almost lost to the wind as their eyes locked together, a promise to each other, a mutual understanding of what was to come and what could have been. The hum of the ship grew louder and the beam of light reappeared, waiting for her, a beacon for her to return to where she belonged, a call she could no longer ignore. Lyra glanced at it, then back at Elias, hesitation flickering in her eyes, their shared moments now etched into their memories, never to be forgotten. "I don't have to go, I think I could just live here with you," she said, her voice filled with hope and a deep sense of longing. "You don't have to go," he said suddenly, surprising even himself, the words unguarded, his heart now on his sleeve. He was no longer hiding his emotions. It was now too late, the cards were on the table. "Stay. We can figure it out, just say it and I won't let you leave." He spoke the words with conviction and a sense of desperate hope. Lyra's expression softened, her eyes filled with so many emotions, and for a moment, Elias thought she might say yes, that she would stay, that his life could be forever changed, that this was not the end but perhaps a new beginning. But then she shook her head, a sad smile tugging at her lips as her face was filled with the knowledge that it could never be. They were from different worlds, and that was something that could not be ignored. "My people need me," she said, her voice tinged with regret. "My world, they need me to come home. I can't let them all down," her words a testament to her loyalty, her need to protect her own people. Elias knew then that their time had come to an end, and it broke his heart. He nodded slowly, the weight of her decision settling over him, the reality of their situation finally becoming clear, and with a heavy heart he accepted that their time together was at an end. "I get it," he said, his voice thick, the words catching in his throat, his heart hurting with every word he spoke. "You've got a whole galaxy waiting for you." He wanted to tell her that his galaxy was wherever she was, but he knew that he could not yet. "And I will wait if I have to, I promise you that." She stepped into the beam of light but didn't let go of his hand, her fingers still intertwined with his, seeking out his warmth. The glow began to envelop her, a soft, radiant light that made her look almost like an angel, and he felt the warmth of it radiating through him, a reminder of their deep connection, a promise that they would always have a piece of each other, no matter what happened next. "Elias," she said, her voice steady but filled with an overwhelming emotion that vibrated through their hands and their hearts. "You changed me, made me better, more human." And he knew that her words were a testament to his own worth and a sign of her affection. "You did the same for me," he replied, his grip tightening for just a moment, not wanting to let go, not wanting to let her go. The light grew brighter, and she began to ascend, her hand slipping from his, the brief contact now leaving him with a sense of loss, but also a sense of hope. "Goodbye, Lyra," he called out, his voice carrying over the hum of the ship, and a single tear fell from his eye, despite all of the strength he was trying to portray, his vulnerability now exposed and a testament to the bond that they had formed. She smiled, a single tear glinting like silver as it fell down her face, reflecting the light of her own people. "Not goodbye," she said, her voice filled with a hope that matched the longing in his heart and a promise that they would meet again. "Someday," she promised, and then she was gone, her light leaving a lasting impact on him. And then she was gone, the beam of light fading as the ship rose into the sky, heading back to its home among the stars, leaving him with the silence of the forest and the memory of their shared journey. Elias stood there, watching until it disappeared from view, leaving only the quiet of the forest, the first rays of morning light, the memory of her touch, and the hope that someday they would meet again, and their story would finally have a beginning. Titan trotted over, pressing against Elias's leg, as if sensing his master's sorrow, and offering him silent comfort, as if he was also sad that she was gone. Elias rested a hand on the dog's head, his mind a whirlwind of emotions, his heart a mixture of pain and longing, but also a strange sense of peace, as he knew that he would always carry her with him, no matter where he went, and that his life had changed for the better, even in the face of his grief. For a long moment he stood there in the clearing, staring at the spot where she had disappeared, her presence now a memory in his mind. The ache of her absence was sharp, but beneath it was something else, hope, a spark of determination that told him he wasn't done yet, and that his life was no longer empty, he had a new purpose. He turned towards the horizon, the sunlight breaking through the trees and painting the world in gold, a new day and a new beginning, a sign that he was ready to move forward. There was work to be done, a life to rebuild, and maybe, just maybe, a chance that their paths would cross again someday when their story could truly begin, a dream that he would cling to forever. With a deep breath, Elias squared his shoulders, his body moving with a newfound energy, and began the walk back to his cabin, his faithful companion, Titan, trotting faithfully by his side, his steps purposeful, and his heart filled with a sense of determination, ready for whatever challenges the future held. Want more thrilling adventures like this? Don't miss out. Subscribe now and join us for brand new stories every day. Hit that notification bell so you never miss the next twist in the tale. We've got so much more to share.